rise above, extinguish fear, rise above, extinguish.
So, for everyone that's tuned in, thank you very much. For everyone that's sharing what I'm trying to put out, please do, because things are getting so close. The World Economic Forum has now said that the Great Reset happens in January 2021. Straight from the words of Klaus Schwab, the head of the World Economic Forum. It's talked about by Prince Charles, it's talked about by David Attenborough every day this week in the mainstream media. It's coming. Secure your assets, batten down your hatches, make networks of like-minded people, and prepare for the storm. Guys, thank you very much. Rise above.
So that's Lance Murdock there speaking last Saturday in Bournemouth, Martin. I mean, I think there are certainly some errors there. But, I mean, even if 1/4 of what he's saying there is true, it's pretty concerning about Serco, effectively privatisation of the whole government and particularly military-industrial complex, both in here and the United States.
Well, it's interesting to hear what he had to say. I mean, I think possibly that a lot of it needs to be properly checked. I mean, he's made various pretty strong assertions there, and you know, people need to make sure that they're just not, you know, that there are genuine research that he's done.
I mean, some of those things he was talking about, we've covered on the show.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that these monstrous companies are a threat is quite clear. I mean, you don't need to be, you know, I mean, that's obvious. Why, for example, should any private company be running prisons? I mean, it's normal practice in the US, and it's become normal practice here. But I mean, I think it's absolutely extraordinary that people should be making a private profit out of locking people up.
His big, I suppose, implication there is that this is effectively a kind of contract fraud. The idea of privatising these services. Yep. Should be being put out to tender, so Joe Bloggs and anybody can tender for stuff. But actually, these people have got an inside track, so they're getting it all. It's effectively a giant cartel.
Indeed. And, of course, it's not just Serco. You've got G4S and various other companies as well. And you've got BlackRock in the US, which has basically taken over running the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, even though they're a private company for private profit. This is a process by which oligarchs all over the world are taking over, the government to make it pliable to their needs. But of course, he talked there about what's going on in China, and yes, there are definitely issues in China about human rights and the system that they're setting up. But it's not a Serco system, is it? It's the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, maybe
system.
Serco are copying what the Chinese are doing.
Well, I mean, but everybody's doing the same stuff. Because ultimately what we're talking about here is World War III, and World War III will be organised on that kind of basis.
China
whoever's doing it.
A little bit similar to our 3-tier system where we're doing in our various regions. Anyway, 3 seems to be the main number that people like to use because apparently it's big enough for people to kind of understand. If you start getting 4, 5 and 6, people just like to lose track of it. But 3, people can get their head around. Anyway, we're going to be hearing later from the Vox Pops in Cardiff last Sunday, the day after that recording was made by Lance Murdock there. And we're going to be hearing also from an exclusive interview with Lance after we've had a good old look at the Great Reset, because I think the Great Reset, we need to hear from the people who are doing that. Klaus Schwab from the World Economic Forum, who seems to be in the process of taking over from the United Nations. They've had a partnership agreement last year where, you know, many campaigners around the world are saying, well, actually, this puts the World Economic Forum in the driving seat of the United Nations now because they just have the money to do it, whereas the UN is strapped for cash, so they're taking over the UN. It's a kind of hostile takeover bid. But let's have a listen now to some music from Lance, and this is called Rise Above. The actual music is called Don't Believe Me.
Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Go study history. Go study history. Politicians, professors and scientists, controlled by some rioters. Through 2 world wars they've been trying it. Corporate investment, no matter who the finalists. Don't believe me? Go study history. Check the activity of bloodline dynasty. Sumer, Egypt and Rome. Consistently pan-European imperial misery. World conflicts enact social change, so they want it. But we must abstain, acquiesce, and you're in for a world of pain. A workhouse where you dream of a minimum wage. That's the plan, but it's closer than you think. We'd be there now if it wasn't for the cosmic shift. They're panicking, the game is up. It's all illusion, the only truth is love. They rewrote the history books, you can't quote how the real history looks. Empires thrive from the lands they took. We're in the same boat, it's kept afloat by crooks. Been the same way for more than 1,000 years. There's no love here, all you're allowed is fear. Break through the clouds, so the sky is clear. Satanic whispers, hidden in the sounds of prayers. Dark suits, cold hearts, no empathy. Fill positions of power in our embassy. Stone circles and burning effigies. Chanting mantras to bring forth energies. Secret meetings that map out our destinies. Hooded figures, manifest entities. Pollute our minds so we got no memory. For centuries, helplessly trapped by the treachery. Don't believe me? Obelisks and illuminated torches. Landmarks of malevolent forces. Sorcerers aim to contain your mind state. Open your eyes where you're already blind, mate. You want the truth, better ask and why. Your worldview got squeezed through a needle's eye, and here's the proof. They extinguish lives, conflicts built on evil lies, no surprise. We don't know of no agenda, disguised from the light from the moment you enter. Survival of flight, you're a lifelong member. That's right, since they sliced the placenta. Now, welcome to the slave race. Very few will ever find out how the game's played. Unless you wake up, keep on playing it. They look at me and think, why is he saying it? Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Don't believe me? Go study. Don't believe me? Go study history. Go study history.
Well, that's MC Double L, aka Lance Murdock, Martin. Interesting little tune, still playing out. Nice. I mean, you know, certainly he's saying here that in a way he's sort of doing what we were doing there, comparing Donald Trump to the Roman Empire. You know, he's saying that actually there's quite a lot of control of history. I mean, George Orwell said something very, very similar, didn't he? About, you know, that he who controls the past controls the present, and who controls the present controls the future.
Well, that's true, and you know, people are there's widespread distrust of authority and of corporations and the governments that they control. But you know, like everything else, the more you look at things, the more complex they are.
I mean, he's talking about his Bournemouth talk he did. We heard there about Serco. He finishes off really by pointing people towards this whole thing of the Great Reset. Now, I suppose it would be obvious for the banksters, the global elite, to engineer, if they're going to engineer a crisis, rather like something that happened in 1929, the financial crash of Wall Street. I mean, is it possible to engineer something like that, or these things just happen and run out of control?
Well, they would happen and run out of control anyway, because that's the nature of the beast. I mean, capitalism is a scramble for profit, and therefore it's not a very, it's basically an anarchic setup. But of course, there is also manipulation. And, if we look at what's happened the strategy of tension in Western Europe in the 70s and the 80s, leading up to 9/11, which then allowed, of course, the dot-com bubble had burst at that point. And what should have happened is that capitalism should have reset at that point. But they stopped it because they said, because of 9/11, we got to pump loads of money into the financial services sector to prop it up. And then, of course, every time the financial services sector has crashed, they've come back in with even more stuff.
I mean, what do you make of
to prop it up?
1929, though, the Wall Street crash?
Yeah.
There are all sorts of different theories about that. Some saying that it was just happened, but there are others who are saying actually there was a knowledge amongst the financial elite that the stock market was due to topple, and so they decided that they wanted to topple it at the time that was most convenient for them and make as much money as possible.
Well, interestingly enough, I was reading about this morning. People were Trump and various of his colleagues were briefing Wall Street that the pandemic was going to be much worse than they were saying. In public, they were saying, we're not too worried about this, we think we've got it under control. In private, they were saying to their Wall Street chums, it's time to short the market. So
does that mean they're helping them make money out of the crash?
Basically, yes.
It's insider trading.
It's insider trading. That's right. Yeah, and it's so normal that it's actually, you know, it's what goes on.
Well, that's supposed to be a crime, but of course now apparently if you're a government agency, it's not a crime anymore.
Exactly. I mean, this is the way things have always run.
But the Great Reset is certainly worth looking into, and we'll be doing that in a minute with Lance himself. But before that, I thought we'd have a listen to Sky News Australia, whose Rowan Dean has also done, and there's a much longer piece, and this is just an excerpt from it, 7 minutes long or so, where he has a really good look at the Great Reset. So here's an extract with some of the interviews with some of the big players like Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum and our very own Prince Charles.
The World Economic Forum in January 21, which will serve as a global summit devoted to the Great Reset. This summit will bring the decision makers physically to Davos, but it will be interconnected with a virtual twin summit driven by the young generation, our global shapers. They will integrate over 400 hubs into the dialogue of Davos and ensure that the Global Reset Initiative is really forward-looking and takes into account the voices of all who are left behind.
Now, put aside for the moment that bloke looks like he's auditioning for the head of Smersh in the next James Bond movie. He is, in fact, Klaus Schwab, the founder and head of the World Economic Forum. He is a total whack job, in my opinion, and I'll get into that in a second. He's a big fan of drones, algorithms, and the Chinese Communist Party, and he believes there's a fourth industrial revolution underway that is changing what it means to be human. And he peddles this sicko fantasy that humans and machines will somehow merge in his green utopia. Bonkers, like I said, but this lunatic has some very, very powerful friends determined to push the Great Reset button.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight severe virus, but to shape the system.
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path. It is an opportunity we have never had before and may never have again. So we must use all the levers we have at our disposal, knowing that each and every one of us has a vital role to play.
Now is the time to think what history would say about this crisis. What is it that would make it so that history would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset?
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate and rebalance our world. Rebalancing investment, harnessing science and technology, and advancing the transition to net zero emissions, all elements of the Great Reset, are fundamental to building the future we need.
Prince Charles insists all the levers at our disposal must be used to enforce the Great Reset. How on earth that one sentence alone does not disqualify Charles from ever succeeding to the throne is beyond me. He is now not only fully immersed in hardcore left-wing eco-politics, he is advocating some bizarre form of eco-fascism. The Queen must step in and insist he have nothing further to do with this freak show. After all, we are currently seeing in Victoria just what it looks like when all the levers at our disposal are being used to enforce the COVID-19 restrictions, which include curfews, lockdowns, enforced mask wearing, shutting down of businesses, making you stay within 5 kilometres of your own home, not visiting the dying rellos, and on and on. Remember, it's not me linking COVID to climate change. It is these lunatics, including Charles and the United Nations and the IMF, who want to replicate the global response to COVID and repurpose it for climate change, to enforce zero net emissions. Just to remind you, this bloke Schwab is the kingpin of the World Economic Forum, the chief body that wants a globalised world with a partnership between government and big business, globalisation that basically runs the show. In this week's Spectator magazine, Maurice Newman writes, already Professor Schwab and his colleagues have started mobilising vast networks of left-wing activists Those who scoffed at claims that climate change was a stalking horse for a new world order should think again. That reality is now in full view. Intense pressure will be applied to parliaments everywhere to pass enabling laws and to abdicate more responsibilities to unelected bureaucrats in global institutions. Crony capitalism is anathema to genuine market economies, and giving more leverage to those who encourage it is fascistic, says Morris Newman. Schwab has written extensively about humanity being altered by machines, nanotechnology. He's a big fan of drones, artificial intelligence. Weirdly enough, Daniel Andrews recently ditched attempts to detain people on the suspicion that they might be about to disobey COVID regulations, has eerie echoes in Schwab's boasting how technologies can intrude into the hitherto private space of our minds, reading our thoughts and influencing our behaviour. And Schwab predicts, as capabilities in this area improve, the temptation for law enforcement agencies and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, assess guilt, or even possibly retrieve memories directly from people's brains will increase. All of this, Schwab says, is redefining what it means to be human. Sounding like a demented character in a Batman comic, Schwab also writes gleefully that sensors, memory switches and circuits can be encoded in human gut bacteria, and that smart dust, arrays of full computers with antennas, can now organise themselves inside the body. Yep, this Marvel Comics whack job runs the world's most prestigious economic forum, and every year our corporate CEOs and business leaders go grovelling to him at Davos, and worse, our government wastes your money sending senior politicians and highly paid public servants to dance to this madman's tune. It's a disgrace. Oh, and did I mention he's a huge fan of China as the leader of his brave new world?
It was very appropriate to invite the president to join us, and he, as the leader of the country, to talk to us about the future's engagement of China in global affairs and the leadership role China will assume in determining and constructing our global future.
And why China? Well, apart from the drones and the surveillance, chat to the Uyghurs about that, they also pretend to care about climate change.
And China has already taken the lead. Just look in the negotiations in Paris on the environment.
COVID, China, climate change. The Great Reset is a toxic, poisonous, ugly offspring of fascism dressed up in the frilly frocks of environmentalism. It's a horror show. So what to do? Our Governor-General must insist to the Queen that Charles ceases all involvement with this travesty. The Morrison government must refuse to send any delegates to Lucerne in May, and any Australian businesses that participate in this grotesquerie deserve the full wrath of Australian consumers and shareholders.
Okay, so that's Rowan Dean on Sky News Australia. Martin, very, very prejudiced, biased piece, really, one-sided against this. I mean, don't you think actually that at some point something has to give here, that we're going to have some, replacement for the IMF? Because as you've been saying for the last 10, 12 years, that capitalism is going to crash. Now, at least it looks like the World Economic Forum, Schwab, Prince Charles, etc., have got a plan.
Well, what's going to happen is there are various plans to deal with what's coming next. And the capitalist class has got its own idea of how it's going to resolve the crisis. And that, Schwab is very well connected to coordinate all of this. He's, he will know the people at the head of Serco, at the head of G4S. He will know the BlackRock people. He obviously knows Prince Charles. I think the assessment of the Chinese, because you've got a very right-wing Australian commentator there, as far as he's concerned, the Chinese are just part of this. I think that in actual fact there are contradictions between what the Chinese want to do and what the Western powers want to do. That doesn't mean that they haven't got overlapping interests. I mean, that's exactly what the Chinese would say, is, look, why can't we work together?
Surely
but in actual fact, they're at daggers drawn.
Well, maybe.
So that doesn't really fit
I'm not so sure
it?
about that. I think there's quite a lot in the West that would like to have the same sort of authoritarian power, biometrics, that sort of thing, control over people's lives as they've got in China.
Yes, but of course the Chinese are doing it on their own bat because they've got their own agenda. And of course, there's some people like Schwartz, and there are elements within the Western capitalist elite that want to do deals with China, and there are others that don't. And in actual fact, there's a contradiction there, because they can't quite work out whether they want, are we going to beat them or are we going to join them?
Okay, well, let's get Lance Murdock's take on this. MC Double L and his channel Rise Above, Double LMC. Because we have an extended interview with him now, which is about 45 minutes long, where he really goes into why he's gotten into the why he believes that there's some serious stuff going on there, and also I suppose winding up by looking very, very closely at this World Economic Forum project. May, we just heard from the Australian guy there, but usually the Davos happens in January in Switzerland. But anyway, so here's Lance Murdock and his take on COVID and where we're all heading.
My name's Lance Murdock, aka Double LMC. For the last 20 years, I've been an MC in various different capacities, mainly a rave MC at drum and bass things for like 15 years. I've done, presenting work, some radio work. In the last 5 years, I've mainly been concerned with combat sports MCing, which has sort of eventually taken me all over the world. That's really taken off in the last 5 years. All over the world. I mean, for instance, in July, I did a 4-week stint out in Romania and Sweden with an outfit called Brave Combat Federation, which is actually owned by the Sheikh of Bahrain. So that was a very interesting experience. And I got to see what Sweden is actually like firsthand, because I spent 4 weeks in Stockholm throughout July, which is really, really eye-opening.
So what is this combat sport? Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, all types of combat sports. Kickboxing, I have a professional boxing MC license. I've done some work on BT Sport. Whether I'll ever get booked to work on BT Sport again is another question after I've said some of the things that I've said recently. So, yeah, Cage Warriors Northwest, lots of cage fighting events, boxing, kickboxing, Muay Thai, all types of ring sports and cage sports. I am the guy that says ladies and gentlemen and gets everyone riled up before the guy.
So can you just tell us a bit about how you got into this, Lance?
Well, I've always been an MC. Always wanted to be an MC since I was 12 years old. After listening to a Wu-Tang album, Enter the Wu-Tang, one of the most seminal hip hop albums of all time, I decided I wanted to be a rapper at the age of 12. By the age of 18, I was on stage up in London at raves and stuff. And then for the last 20 years, mainly up and down the UK, I've been resident at the Full Moon Party in Thailand in Koh Phangan for the last 10 years. I do a lot of work out in Southeast Asia at various different parties and raves out there. But while this has all been going on with the music for 20 years, I've also been an absolutely avid researcher into the hidden story of what's really going on in the world, government cover-ups, false flag, terror attacks, who's really behind the power structure of the world. This all started for me in 9/11, so it was 19 years ago. So that's how long I've been looking into all this stuff. And basically, when I came back from Southeast Asia in January this year, I knew last year I'd been researching the UN and the World Economic Forum and the global reset, as everyone likes to laugh about it back then. Nobody's laughing now. Back in January, when I flew back through Suvarnabhumi Airport in Bangkok, I already heard about coronavirus, and immediately I passed it off as what I thought was just going to be a bit of a red herring like SARS and MERS. They're bigging it up. It's not really going to be anything. But when I flew back, there's more Chinese tourists in Thailand, where I spend a lot of time, than all the other tourists put together. For instance, there's a lot of Chinese people there. And I watch all of the international news channels, a lot of the Asian news channels, especially the non-communist Chinese news. And as I flew back and I saw what was going on in the airport, and I got back here, I think it was the 15th of January, which I decided that this virus, whatever it was going to be, was going to be the event that tipped the global economy into the grand reset. And then lo and behold, I started saying this online, etc., etc. People laughed at me. The lockdown happened. My entire calendar for the year, I have 40 shows lined up all over the UK, both music and combat sports, MMA, boxing, big festivals. Now, obviously, that all got wiped. So I had a lot of time, and the thing is, I hadn't really posted about this stuff for a couple of years because I didn't want to affect my career. I've been on BT Sport, I've been on ITV, I've been on some really mainstream news stations, and I stopped talking about this stuff. But then when the lockdown happened, after I was quiet for a couple of weeks, and then people online started asking me, like, what is going on? Like, what do you think? I said, listen, I'm not going to post anything until I've got a better idea of what I think is going on. And I'm going to be honest with you, back in February and March, because I've been researching the Chinese Communist Party and what they've been up to and some of the atrocities with the human organ harvesting and the internment or the re-education camps with the Uyghur Muslims. I've been researching that avidly for 2 years. I was instantly really scared that this was actually going to be even worse than they said, the worst type of chimera, sort of bioweapon virus. And I was at the supermarket with my gloves and my mask on when nobody else was, and everyone looked at me like a nutter. But then I started to look at the stats, and the rest is history. And then I started the Rise Above channel on YouTube, and after that speech I made last weekend, things have gone absolutely crazy. I've been completely bombarded with emails, messages, people asking for the transcript of what I said, asking for interviews. By the way, thank you very much for inviting me on the show. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
I think probably the someone will probably want to get hold of your tablet as well, because most of the research seemed you were scrolling through it rapidly. I've never quite seen anybody deliver it so far.
To be honest, it was mostly bullet points. What happened? I'll tell you how this happened, yeah? So I've already started my channel back in March, and I've been speaking about. I've started a series of shows called COVID 1984. For anyone that listening to this, you know why I've called it that. It's pretty obvious now. And each show I've covered a different aspect of it. First of all, the fake inflated deaths from PHE and the CDC. I try and mirror things in the US and the UK, so I've got a broader audience. Then I looked into ID 2020. Basically, 2 weeks ago, it must have been 2 weeks on the Friday, I saw a picture online of 9 different national newspapers, and each one of them, because I've studied media studies and advertising, there were no headlines at all, just a picture of the track and trace with a different colour on each newspaper in this neat 3x3 grid. And that was so symbolic. It really spoke out to me because I heard something about track and trace. I knew who Serco were roughly from garbage disposal and stuff like that. But I saw that and something just lit up in my head. And I went on a 4-day, I reckon I spent 30 or 40 hours just rapidly. I had all these preconceptions about what I thought I was going to find. And the worst thing was every single one of them was true and 10 times worse. I sort of looked, I heard Serco and I wrote a list of what I thought I was going to find, and I found all of it, and it went a lot worse. So that was all of that on my tablet was all bullet points. I didn't get through most of them, and most of it was off the cuff because I don't like to read. I like to I like to flow a little bit more. But it was a pretty extensive investigation. I didn't get much sleep.
It was fascinating, and I think one of the things that you brought out, you teased out, was this link around the Commonwealth, which I think is, and we know about the 5 eyes, don't we? And the 6 eyes, if you include Israel, as quite a lot of people do. That there is still some very, very strong links between these different crown countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the UK. And but the thing that I found so fascinating is you managed to pin a lot of this down to this thing called the Pirbright Institute. So who are these?
It appeared on my radar back in February. I'd heard of Pirbright because it's in my part of the world. Funny enough, the 3 companies, or not really companies, whatever they are, arms of this octopus that I've started to expose, they're all quite local to me. They're all in the southwest. Hook in Hampshire, Pirbright in Surrey. That kinetic, I drive past a huge kinetic like installation almost every day. They are heavily embedded around me, so I've always been aware of these companies, and I knew from my research from a couple of years ago that Pirbright was essentially, I'll say it, they were responsible for the foot and mouth outbreak. They were fined heavily for it as well. And if you look on the map where the foot and mouth outbreak were, like you can see, it's just a circle, and Pirbright Institute's right in the middle. So they were instantly on my radar when all this kicked off. And I realised that, it wasn't hard to find a link between the Wuhan Institute, the Gates Foundation, and Pirbright. They don't cover their tracks. There's a clear there's a clear paper trail. It's
I think when
very
people
obvious.
think about privatisation, I mean, obviously you mentioned in your talk DERA, the Defence Evaluation Research Establishment, which was privatised around 2000 and then became Kinetic. It
seems like in 1999 there was a lot of things that happened financially, and a lot in 1999 was a very pivotal year for a lot of these corporations and being privatised. I've noticed that as a year that keeps coming up.
Yeah, but the point being that a lot of these institutes are supposed to have been sort of privatised, so kind of anybody can buy shares in them around the world. We were talking on our show last week about the number of public utilities, gas, electricity, water, that sort of thing, that have been bought up by big Chinese companies. But these seem to have been sort of transferred from government to crown. And I wonder if you think it's fair to say that.
Well, absolutely. This is the thing, right? Everyone was losing their rag because they thought that Serco was a private company, and they really only went that far as making that statement, oh, it's a private company, it's not the NHS. Well, if you really look at it, is it really a private company? Because like Kinetic, Serco is owned by the CCS, which is the Crown Commercial Services. And above that is the Crown Estate. And as my research read, they still have what's called like the golden share. It's a thing that works through the Privy Council. But also, who else has 200,000 shares in Serco? It's Bill Gates, not the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, their trust, worth, I think, $25 million, particularly in the private prison sector of Serco. And that seems like a really weird investment for such a kind philanthropist as Bill Gates.
Yeah, there's something a little bit fascistic about these private prisons, certainly, because if you've got a crooked and corrupt judicial system, which it seems we're heading towards that way in the UK with the Assange trial and things like that, you can actually start stuffing your prisons with prisoners and make a private profit out of it, which is obviously a little bit dodgy. But look, can I just ask you, and take a step back from all of this, because I think for many of us, we want to know what's going on. Something is definitely not right about this. Anybody who perhaps back in April, May was saying, well, OK, this will be all right for a few months. They've now realised that it's not going to be for a few months, that we're not going back to normal until there's some enormous changes in society. And one of those changes seems to be that the government is going to be able to do, as it already has been doing, things without real recourse to Parliament, or, they can change the laws really by clicking their fingers.
Yeah, I mean, like on my channel, I've exposed, I think it was the 28th of September it's before that, when they changed the laws about the rollout of any type of vaccine to do with COVID-19. They've basically removed all liability from anyone advertising, producing, administering, or recommending any type of new treatment for COVID-19, which would include obviously vaccines. So, like, if you look at how many millions of pounds in this country, and I don't know how many it is in the US, has been paid out in vaccine damages over the years, that is like a sweeping bill. So that means that now, if you have brain damage, paralysed, etc., there's no comeback, there's no recourse. And
so if I was then to recommend a cocktail of strychnine and belladonna as a cure for COVID-19, I would be indemnified, would I?
Well, I read the document, and I couldn't see anywhere in it where it actually differentiated what you could and couldn't prescribe. It basically said, it took away every piece of red tape and bureaucracy, every regulation, any level of testing, any level of anything. It sort of just opened the door that you can prescribe anything you want or recommend it with no recourse whatsoever.
So what's going on here, Lance? I think this is what people want to know.
Do you want me to tell you what I think at the highest level of what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay. Like I said, back in August of 2019, I've had people that follow the markets for me, and I heard about something called the Great Reset. I knew already that for over 10 years, our fiat monetary fractional reserve lending system, which is basically money, Kabbalistic money magic, it's fake, and it can't be, and it's been artificially inflated for at least 10 years, so it has to go. I use an analogy of a hot air balloon that's going down because it's got a tear in it, but they're pumping more hot air in it to make it go up, but it's making the tear bigger, so the balloon is getting bigger, but it's falling faster. So I knew the financial reset was happening, and I pretty much had been told that the smallest global event was enough to tip over the economy, because what they want to transition us to is something that's aligned with Agenda 2030, which I've been researching for a few years, and the sustainable goals, which in a nutshell, it used to be called Agenda 21, which was much more radical. But Agenda 2030 is something the UN has sort of tarted up a little bit and made it all about sustainable developments and equality. But it's essentially the end of free movement, the end of private property. They want everybody off the land into cyber cities. Obviously, I'm generalizing here. So this Great Reset, what it is, COVID-19 is essentially a red herring. There is another coronavirus in the mix. We've had coronaviruses around for decades. There've been many before, SARS, MERS, etc. But they're using it as an excuse, I believe, from my research, to shut down the world economy systematically, to use this as a cover story to transition us to a new economic model that is based around a single digital currency, which is digital, cashless, controlled by the IMF and WEF, essentially cutting out all middle and high level and obviously high street bank. That's all gone. In layman's terms, it's what people have been calling the New World Order, the one world government, for a long time. And I believe that's literally what they are trying to do as we speak, all around the world. At least in most countries that are going along with the WHO and the UN plan. Not all countries are playing ball. A lot of African nations are not playing ball. Belarus, the president of Belarus, didn't play ball with the WHO. He turned down a lot of money. What happened in 2 weeks? Huge uprising in his country. Is it the president of Burundi, 55 years old? He died 2 weeks after kicking the World Health Organization out of his country. These could be coincidences, of course they could. But people that turned down the offer of the WHO and the plan of lockdowns and restrictions, and they don't seem to fare very well on the world stage. I mean, Donald Trump being a famous rebel against their plan on the face of it anyway. The only guy that's sort of suggesting therapeutics like Regeneron, Remdesivir, hydroxychloroquine. That's a big one. When Trump first said about hydroxychloroquine, apparently Elon Musk, funnily enough, was actually the first guy to suggest it. I took that as a marker. I sort of had an idea that, this is only a coronavirus. We've had them before. I did a bit of research. Dr. Fauci actually wrote a whole paper about how hydroxychloroquine was one of the best ways to treat coronavirus and SARS. That's back in 2005. So that's a whole other line of inquiry, another thing that Fauci should be on trial for. But yeah, it's definitely not what it says it is on the tin. It's being used as a global shutdown. And I think a lot of people now, the Great Reset has been talked about left, right and centre. Prince Charles, David Attenborough, every day of the week, you can hear Prince Charles saying something about the global reset. So, yeah, this has been planned for sure.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that the idea is here that the massive bailouts that have happened, another $1 trillion or so, which has gone to the banks and the big companies to keep them going through all this. Very little of it has really trickled down to ordinary people. The actual effect has been really like a hammer blow on many small businesses, whereas big business and particularly big tech like Amazon and Facebook have basically doubled their value in the space of a couple of months.
I think what it is as well, I mean, to elaborate a little bit, it is definitely the bleeding dry of the middle class. And basically it's a move towards putting everyone onto UBI, onto universal basic income. I think that's really the plan. Because at the end of the day, we're also dealing with the onset of the fourth industrial revolution, where there's going to be a lot of automation. So a lot of people are in the next 10 to 20 years going to be out of the job. And I think what they're doing is they're pushing it forward quickly. And what's also happening is obviously the mass vaccination program from Gavi, who have been talking about their absolute sort of religious belief that they have the right to vaccinate 7 billion people. And it seems to me very obvious that coronavirus is a pretty crappy candidate to use to vaccinate 7 billion people with the kill rate it has had. I highlighted in my speech last week about tuberculosis. The WHO says it's the world's most deadly infectious killer. 1.5 million people every year die of tuberculosis. There's no mass medication. There's no shutdowns. There's no masks. There's so many aspects of this that you can look at to see that nothing whatsoever makes sense. The fact that it's not even, COVID is not even designated a highly deadly infectious disease by our government anymore. That happened back in March. Yet we've still got 24/7 fear porn on the TV, systematic shutdowns of the country. I think we're going to go for I think they're going to try a full national shutdown. I really think that's what's going to happen.
Well, I mean, this week our Mayor of Bristol has publicly called for powers to lock the city down, even though central government doesn't want it to happen, because in the southwest the rates have been so low. One almost gets the idea that he's sitting in his office kind of itching to do a lockdown. So, we've got people in power. By the way, he hasn't been elected this year. He was supposed to be re-elected in May, but the election was cancelled. So really, he's got his he's a dictator year where he's not actually be elected. So I mean, at the end of the day, can be quite scary. In fact, more scary than COVID is the political power, which is coming to a very few people without any checks and balances, almost like a kind of authoritarian rule. So have you got anything to say to listeners who are a bit nervous about that? I think because we kind of need a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, something to keep us going, Lance.
I think a bit of light at the end of the tunnel is that as things get crazier, more and more people are going to wake up. And the fact is that I truly believe this, that we actually have to consent to our own enslavement. At the end of the day, all of these small, little, ludicrous measures that we're asked to do, like businesses restricting how many people they can come in, this track and trace, et cetera, we have to have the power to say no. It's about acquiescence, and I've studied the more esoteric side of what these people at the very top believe, and whether everyone else believes in that stuff or not, they do. And they do believe in the power of free will. That's why they tell us what they're going to do, sometimes decades in advance. They write it down in graphic detail. That's why some people say, how can you think you've got the power to make these predictions? I'm not making any predictions. The fact is that, when these documents came out 5-10 years ago, I just read them back to front. And these people are very open about what they're going to do. But the only way that it's going to work is if we acquiesce towards it. And at the moment, unfortunately, still a good percentage of the population are still operating out of a level of fear. They're literally consuming everything that the BBC and Channel 4 and Sky News are telling them, which is 24 hours a day. Live in fear, be scared, stay at home, wear a mask, don't see your family. I mean, people think this is dangerous. I don't really care. I think people just need to ignore it. I think if you're vulnerable, yes, you can isolate from this new coronavirus that we've got in the mix of our seasonal flu. Because at the end of the day, it's getting lumped in with seasonal flu. They've changed the reports this week. Soon what they're going to do, it's very obvious, for years they're going to continue to just do it with flu season every year. And we'll have a 6-month lockdown until in 3 or 4 years' time we're on our knees. So what everybody needs to do is start speaking the truth, stepping up, refusing. And when people say, why are you refusing? You say, it's not because I'm ignorant. It's not because I'm selfish. It's because we're being lied to. And I'll tell you what, I think that there's a very high percentage of people that are still playing along with it, i.e. wearing their mask, walking around outside, not seeing their friends and family. I think they're doing it not because they really believe that it's as dangerous as they've been told. I think people can actually see through the lies, because the lies about what's happening are very, very obvious with just half an hour, 45 minutes of cursory research. But the problem is that most people don't have the urge to do that extra little bit of investigation past what they're being told from the TV. And that's a real problem.
Well, I think
that's why I'm being more vocal. That's why I'm trying to step it up and increase.
I think it's also because the fear works. So a lot of people are, they're basically hit. It's almost like an undercut. It's straight to people's subconscious. So they're telling you, look, if you don't do this, you're either going to get fined, you're going to get criminalised.
My granny's going to die. You're going to kill my family. When I was speaking in the street last week on the PA system, and none of us had masks, we were saying something about we're trying to avoid tyranny, etc. And someone screamed, "I don't want my whole family to drop dead." And I sort of, and I replied with, I don't want future generations to be digitally enslaved to a techno-fascistic, totalitarian AI system, or something. I didn't go quite that deep. But the thing is, when you're dealing with that level of fear response, I don't want my whole family to drop dead. it's almost like fear has been turned into a virtue. So between people that are, dying into it and, berating other people that are living their lives and breathing fresh air, they turned being fearful into a virtue. And that's a real problem. But like I said I think everybody has an inroad. Everyone's got a little open door. Everyone's got a seed you can plant, and it's different for everybody. Maybe it's losing their job. Maybe it's seeing their elderly relative deteriorate because you can't visit them and thinking how ridiculous it is. It'd be better to see them than to see them wither away, But unfortunately, I have a feeling it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. But I've seen what's happening in Liverpool, and it gives me some courage. I think I'm quite happy about what's happening in Liverpool at the moment.
Now, you were saying you looked into this ID 2020. What do you make of? Because that's something which popped up very early on. Bill Gates was talking about this.
Yeah, basically, I started looking into this last year when I was I've been on Bill Gates's tail for like 5 or 6 years. I never trust him. It's like Jimmy Savile. As soon as before I knew what a paedophile was, I knew he was a paedophile when I was a young kid. I just knew he was not right. I've had the same feeling about Bill Gates for as long as I can remember. So I started getting on about 6 years, and I started researching the digital quantum dot tattoo that he was developing. And I looked at it and I was like, whoa. And this was back start of last year. And basically, I've looked into ID 2020 a lot, and not many people know that it's already happened in Africa. There are already 6,000 people, I believe it's in Ghana, that have a patch on their arm, which is like it's like a transfer, but it has hundreds of hypodermic microneedles in it, and it puts nanodot ink into your arm as it administers a vaccine. So they might have vaccinated them for anything, I don't know, it could have been any excuse. But it's got a payment system in it from MasterCard. They can access government subsidies, energy tokens, etc. And they're already doing it. And ID 2020 is the people behind it are Gavi, which is Gates, Microsoft, which is Gates, the Rockefeller Foundation, which we all know who that is, MasterCard, and a whole host of other subsidiary companies, most of which are also Gates or Rockefeller. It's also intrinsically linked with Agenda 2030 and what's called data-enabled vaccines, which is one of the absolute key things in the health section, the sustainable health section of Agenda 2030. They want everyone to have data-enabled vaccines. So I was like, what the hell is a data-enabled vaccine? So basically, a data-enabled vaccine is something that, people talk about a microchip, like the size of a grain of rice. That was old technology in the 90s. Now we're talking about literally nanotechnology. That's not science fiction. They have nanotechnology, and they can put it in this infrared ink, and it has your vaccine record in it, and you can access MasterCard payment system with it. So it's got technology in it that could do anything a microchip can do, but it's of a nano size. Now, whether we're going to start seeing this patch used, the funny thing is, this patch was actually developed for children. So children that are scared of a needle would have this transfer, and they can put a picture of a superhero on it or something. But these 400 hypodermic microneedles obviously have far different abilities to a regular hypodermic needle. So, ID 2020 wants to give 1 billion people digital ID, which currently have no ID. So everyone in the third world, it looks, will be the guinea pig for this, as is already happening in Africa. But basically, by 2030, by their own words, everybody would have to have this digital ID. Now, the funny thing is, when I looked into this, there was a parallel between Serco, because the companies that were involved in producing the trust stamp, this hash system that scans your face from a single photo and gives you an individual hash, they were also heavily involved in the penal system and control of inmates in the private prison system in the US. So when you talk about track and trace, ID 2020, digital immunity passports, when you look and you follow the money, what you're going to find 10 times out of 10 is the companies that are administering the technology and the infrastructure are involved in private prison systems and basically the penal system, as is Serco. So,
that's fascinating, because we're also seeing, aren't we, right across the world, the discrediting of elected governments. So the idea really is that people are believing less and less in the point of voting, because they can see that the governments aren't really performing. And so in the end of the day, you've got these corporations, these mega companies, these transnational companies waiting in the wings to really take over their role.
Yeah, it's like they've always been there and they've always really been in control. It's like like I exposed in I didn't really go into it in the speech. In my presentation on my YouTube channel, I really go into the detail about what Serco controls. And it's no exaggeration to say that, like, I mean, out of Commonwealth countries, it must run at least 50% of the military installations and hardware and technology and, the immigration service, the prison. It's absolutely mind-boggling. If you talk about like the Umbrella Corporation from Resident Evil, Serco is a very, very, very good candidate for a real-life version of the Umbrella Corporation.
Well, okay, we've talked about the policy, the crystal ball gazing, which we might call intelligent guesswork, maybe. But what about the spiritual? What about the spiritual side of this? Because obviously, the one thing that really can keep people going is a belief in something better, in the human spirit, God, or whatever.
I will say this, without going too deep into my own personal spiritual beliefs. I believe that the reason, it seems to me that this is being rushed, and it also seems to me that it's not going to plan. In Event 201, Bill Gates predicted, and all of the simulations, Event 201 is one of 5 simulations that's happened in the last 15 years involving a respiratory pandemic, right? And they always envisaged in their plans that in the first 7 months, it will take out 20, at least. That was in KDEX. In Event 201, Bill Gates predicted 66 million people. A number that keeps coming up, along with 33, funnily enough. So it seems to me that whatever plan they had, because these people are depopulationists, they definitely wanted to, they need to cull the population to get us all into the cyber cities for Agenda 2030. There's no way there's room for 7 billion people. So I think that something has gone wrong. And I think that there is also another group of global elites that aren't quite on board with murdering loads of people. Because at the end of the day, in this Agenda 2030, there's probably no room for this whole class of millionaires and billionaires. If you're not on board with the highest level of the technocratic fascistic dictatorships, you're probably just going to be lined up against the wall like everybody else. So I do see a kickback. I do think things are happening behind the scenes. I do think that there is a split, the first time ever, in what seemed to be sort of like a monotheistic cult that was behind what's going on, because there is a big spiritual aspect. There's a reason that certain numbers keep popping up in what we're seeing. The rule of 6 is not just the rule of 6. It's 6 people, 6 feet, 2 meters apart for 6 months. That's the rule of 666. 33 is a number that keeps coming up a lot at 66 as well. And this got asked of me in the speech, why? And I said, whether people want to believe it or not, at the highest levels of the WEF and the UN and the WHO, these people are occultists. Whatever you believe about occultism, these are dark occultists, and they do believe in things like natural law and the power of numbers and symbols, colours, frequencies, special dates. And I feel like this is being rushed through because I feel like they're trying to clamp us down, because at the end of the day, if everyone takes in 7 billion people an RNA gene editing vaccine and you have a digital that's a Bible prophecy, and I don't care what anybody says. And I'm not a Christian. I study many different world religions. I don't necessarily follow any of them, but there's definitely a lot more going on than just a pandemic, than just a political overthrow, than just a global financial reset. There's also huge astrological alignments and lunar cycles that are linked into this as well. For instance, not many people know that this month is there's a blue moon this month. It's very rare. It's roughly every 36 to 40 years. The first moon was on, I believe it was on October the 1st, when Boris announced the rule of 666. And the actual blue moon is on the 31st of October, which is also Halloween, All Hallows Eve. And I have a feeling, and I'll make a prediction. I don't care if I'm wrong, but I have a feeling we may go into a full lockdown by the 31st of October. But I feel like these people are rushing, and the more it gets crazy, and the more obvious that they're fudging the figures by mixing it with the flu, the more reports of empty hospitals, the more whistleblowers from the NHS, the more doctors speaking out, people are going to realise what's happening. I really don't think people will accept this vaccine. Some people will, unfortunately, but I don't think everybody else will.
So Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? The way they've managed to kind of keep this going through the summer without any real increase in the numbers of people dying of anything, really.
Yeah, I think that's what the masks were for.
Bringing it through to the next flu season. So all of a sudden, once we're in December, it's going to be flu season again.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone's seen it. It was just last week where Public Health England announced that as of this week onwards, the 8th of October onwards, or last week, they're officially mixing the flu reporting with COVID-19, and they have a new category called ARI, acute respiratory infection. So we have to be really careful now, because when we start to report numbers, are they going to say it's COVID? Because they've stopped saying that. They've already said corona cases, which is very sly, because as we know, coronavirus is rhinovirus, is cold. Yeah. But now what we need to see is if they're actually reporting this new ARI, because ARI contains corona, COVID, flu, and allegedly a lot of pneumonia cases would also be in there as well, because people that die of flu or pneumonia, it's very interchangeable. So, like, you know, the thing is, you can look at their own stats. I usually always quote ONS, Office of National Statistics, because they seem to be the best. You know, PHE change their stats every week because they get caught lying or getting it wrong. So as far as I'm concerned, they can continue doing what they're doing, exposing themselves, blatantly lying and mismanaging. And more people are going to wake up, and hopefully, you know, we go down the road of Germany where we have millions of people protesting, refusing to wear masks. And I hope Liverpool set an example to the rest of the country, to be honest.
I picked up what I think are a couple of smoking guns. One is the shutdown in France in mid-January of chloroquine as a potential cure. The French government actually saying, I think it was the 15th or 16th of January, taking it off the list of medicines that you could just get over the counter. You couldn't from that date. And then also the stocks in the country all supposedly disappeared. This is the one thing that could have saved tens of thousands of lives, potentially.
There's
anyway.
A lot of blood on somebody's hand regarding hydroxychloroquine. A lot. You know, I think it was actually that French professor Didier Raoult, who was the first one. He's a bit of an eccentric character, which probably didn't help. But he was the first one to actually write the whole report on hydroxychloroquine. But the thing is, people only need to go back to look at Dr. Fauci's own report from 2005 to say that it was the best therapeutic for SARS, which essentially
it's interesting. So they knew this. I mean, this is really almost like evidence of a malice of forethought. Yeah? So the other thing is the enormous amount of. I mean, we were reporting on it when we were on FM in Bristol. Back last year, sort of September time, of bringing in legislation to mandate vaccines. Now, that happened in Italy and in Germany and in China last autumn. So, you know, you do wonder, don't you, whether this has been in the pipeline for some time.
They also had the trial run of the first level of mass vaccination, and guess where in China? 3 guesses. Wuhan. It's kind of crazy, right? Because like the whole bat soup and the wet market thing is so rubbish, man. Because by their own admissions, that bat comes from a cave in Yangon, which is quite far away, and by the own wet market admissions, they don't sell that bat at the wet market. Someone's saying it also could have come from a pangolin. It's like, but there's also a level 4 viral containment lab 20 kilometers away. Accepted $3.5 million through Dr. Fauci to move their coronavirus vaccine research, which involved bats, which is all heavily documented by their own admissions. That's not the leaked stuff. That's the official documents of their research into basically using this bat coronavirus. And I can never pronounce the word. It starts with an A and it's got T's in it. It's a word that they do something to the virus to basically make it more viral, so they can test the vaccines on it, and they can have the test cycles be shorter because the vaccine produces quicker. So by their own admissions, $3.5 million was invested in that very research to produce these hybrid chimera coronaviruses taken from a bat from the cave in Yangon, and to create vaccines on them for existing coronaviruses. So it's a pretty rubbish cover story as to why you would be creating the vaccine for a coronavirus that hasn't been bad since SARS and MERS wasn't exactly a huge global problem.
What do we expect with this Great Reset? I mean, they've got Davos in January. We've also had this agreement signed last September, I think it was, between the UN and the World Economic Forum, effectively for a partnership agreement. So that, you've got the World Economic Forum, which has been kind of meeting up in this snowy alpine setting for at least a couple of decades in a January, which is, of course, when nobody can go and protest like we all used to go down to the Euro top summits, the G8 summits and protest. You can't do that at Davos, and you'll freeze to death. But anyway, what do you think's going to come out of that?
Well,
what can we expect?
Here's the thing, for a long time, everybody had their eyes on the Bilderberg Group. And by all intensive purposes, the Bilderberg Group was, the think tank behind all world governments and the highest level elites. For me, what the Great Reset means is they call it stakeholder capitalism. Now, I'm not sure exactly what that's supposed to mean, but to me, it sounds like it means it's capitalism which is owned by huge stakeholders. Average people in normal capitalism that can have a business, they don't sound like stakeholders to me. So it's also linked in hugely with the Green New Deal. And it was always the way that these world elites were going to do one of two things. A nuclear war in the Middle East through the Zionists, or saving the environment from us and, Agenda 2030. It looks like they've gone
both.
for the latter.
Or both.
Well, both, yeah. But, thermonuclear war hasn't happened. I think the idea is that something has to happen, some terrible global event, before we will be herded into the cyber cities and we have no private property and we live like, all the dystopian sci-fi futuristic films that we've seen, all those mixed together and worse, because, I've read all the papers and I've read the articles that the article of A Day in the Life in Agenda 2030. I own nothing. The house I live in doesn't belong to me. Someone else is in another room using this room to do that. In the house that you live in, someone has just walked in and started using a room to do something because you don't own anything. Travel's restricted. We don't ever leave the cyber city. 95% of the Earth's surface is left for rewilding. So it's basically, we're talking about a whole global digital cyber city gulag where, they're painting it as some sort of, full scale luxury communism, where you have everything you need, but you don't have to work, you don't have to pay for anything. But the scary thing is, and again, this is something I exposed quite early on this year, I think in February. Bill Gates has a patent with the numbers 2020 and 666, and you can Google this. It's true. And when you Google this patent, the patent is for a device which is an interface between a human body, which mines cryptocurrency based on the electromagnetic reactions from the human it's attached to. So what this means is, once you've lost your job because of the fourth industrial revolution and you're sat there at home with nothing to do, you can wear this patch and you can essentially sit there for hours consuming media, watching adverts, and based on your reaction from adverts, you can mine cryptocurrency with this device that's linked to a blockchain owned by Microsoft. So as soon as I saw that, I said, well, that's what everyone's going to do afterwards. When no one has a job anymore because everything's automated, so they say this is what it's going to be. Obviously, these are their predictions. You'll be able to sit there just on your ass, basically watching vacuous adverts and commercials all day. And it'll be, the same as they farm our information from Google and smartphones on our reactions of social media. But this is talking about an actual a physical biometric implant that mines cryptocurrency. And I thought, Jesus Christ, you literally couldn't, a sci-fi, I said it in my video, a sci-fi writer would get an erection over something like that. That's so farcical. I couldn't believe it was true. But lo and behold, Bill Gates has the patent.
I suppose, the way money operates is, you can use it as a lure for people to pretty much do anything. I mean, people don't really seem to use morality as a value very much anymore. Most of what they're thinking about when they're making decisions about their life is to do with, is this going to actually bring me some cash in so I can survive or not? So that what you're suggesting there is that, you can say to people, well, you can make a bit of money by sitting and watching adverts.
Well, you say money, but what it will be tokens that will more likely only be redeemable through the network from which you've harvested
some sort.
Yeah, credits. So it's like,
This is
so
the
what stage is
ancient
that?
Egyptian form of currency. This is what the ancient Egyptians had. You didn't have any money as an Egyptian citizen. You had a credit with the Egyptian authorities, basically. So we're going back to that sort of system.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, basically, we're also going to an exact, almost textbook episode of Charlie Brooker's Black Mirror, where everyone is in this futuristic world, and I think they're on exercise bikes all day, watching TV to earn their credits, wearing Lycra.
Okay, Lance.
I don't think there'll be any Lycra in Agenda 2030. I don't know.
All right. So, and it's also interesting, isn't it, that we had Agenda 21 and we're just about to move into 21, and then 30 takes over. There seems to be quite a lot of kind of coded language in all of this. Look, have you got anything to sort of say to cheer us up to think that humanity might actually make it through this without being enslaved?
I think that at the end of the day, right, the yin and the yang has a white and a black for a reason. It can't go all the way black. The pendulum has to swing all the way back. The universe won't allow it. I think the very reason that we're having this conversation and the people are thinking this all around the world is that enough people know what's going on. And I think what's going to happen in the future, if I was going to look to the brighter side, is I think that unfortunately, I think certain countries are going to go for this, and what's going to happen is that other countries are going to break away. Maybe in the future we might have some sort of soft-core Mad Max sort of techno scramble. I've looked at the Rockefeller plan, and they have a four-way axis. So the axis that they're going forward on is called Operation Lockstep. Top-down, technocratic, digital control, quarantine, etc., etc. But there's four other options. One of them is called Smart Scramble, and one of them is called Hack Attack. And they involve total decentralization of power, people using different cryptos, different forms of trade to interact, people scrambling for different technologies to solve problems. There's some conflict in there as well, but I think we're going to go back to basics. I don't think they're going to win. People, even the most asleep people that are totally alien to any of this exterior knowledge, it's going to come to them and it's going to hit them in the face. So I have a saying. At some stage, everyone has to take the red pill. It's your choice. It's much better to willingly take it with a glass of water so it goes down nicely. If you leave it too late, you will always have to take it. But if it gets administered to you against your will, it's not going to be so much fun. So yeah, I'd say please everyone check out my channel. I try to what I try to do on my channel is present the information in a way that you could give it to someone that has never heard of this alternative way of looking at things before, what's going on. But it's also going to give a bit of an insight to people that have already been looking into this as well. So I start easy, and then I tend to take it a little bit deep, and I'm just doing my best to wake people up. I don't know what I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't, to be honest.
Now, one thing I'll just add to that is a bit of a sort of caveat and a warning is that one thing for sure about the global elite, the people, the oligarchy, really you could call them, is that they like to control both sides of the chessboard. So they're very good at creating movements that seem to be, against the establishment, but actually,
absolutely.
So just be very careful, folks, in any sort of movement that you're part of. Be absolutely confident that it's not one of these kind of controlled oppositions. So anyway, Lance, thanks ever so much. Double LMC. We're going to finish
Double LMC on YouTube.
Tunes. Sorry?
I was about to say, on YouTube, I'm the word double L and MC, and the show's called Rise Above. I also make music. There's music videos on there, and I do not talk about anything apart from these subjects, as I have done since 2016. A lot of the music on there is from 2016 when I started talking about this.
So when did you write the song Don't Believe Me?
I actually wrote that 10 years ago. I recorded it last year, and I made the video in lockdown in a disused naval base. I broke into it.
Well, we're going to hear it now. Do you want to just tell us what's the inspiration behind it before we hear it?
Basically, it covers all aspects of a different hidden history of the world, and it's basically, if you don't believe me, go and study history. Check the activity of bloodline dynasties. It's all about history. It's all about the occult forces that are controlling us. It's quite a fun tune as well. It's not too serious or dark, so it's enough for anyone. But yeah, check me out on YouTube, double LMC, Rise Above. Yeah.
Lance Murdock, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Tony. It's been an absolute pleasure.
So that's Lance Murdock there speaking to us earlier this week. We're not going to hear that song right now because we heard it a little bit earlier. Don't Believe Me. But Martin, he's really showing there that he's, I think, got a real depth of understanding of essentially what he's talking about is a kind of system which is all ready to go, which is going to enslave humanity if we're not careful.
Well, I'm definitely of the opinion that there is an attempt to enslave humanity, and it's great that people are questioning what's going on. But, the answers are still complicated and messy.
I'm serious, far from humorous. Your biopsy results are tumorous. Outlook is dubious. The bad news starts when you exit the uterus. Do we really stand a chance? Well, that's a big question to ask. When you're stood on the edge of the precipice, you can't look back and reminisce. It's too late now, you should have took heed and note of subliminal messages. Looked in the cracks and the crevices. Use your brain to identify blatant menaces. Blinded by Babylon's benefits, denying the Amazon's evidence. Too ready to consume the remedies dispensed to you by your enemies.